Hopefully we'll be implementing a plug and charge solution in the future because we know our hardware is sort of capable across Europe because we use Alpitronic as you've identified. Pricing is, as you say, mid-range intentionally because it's that destination element for the ultra rapids, but there is that convenience. I think the first thing to say is there is an increasing amount of data, and every organization, including ourselves, including our investors, love to get more of it. And we definitely caveat everything with something being interesting or something being useful.
Hi, I'm Gary, and this is EV Musings, a podcast about renewables, electric vehicles, and things that are interesting to electric vehicle owners. On the show today, we'll be chatting with charge point operator Raw Charging. Over the many seasons of this podcast, I've spoken with quite a few of the major charge point operators across the country. Osprey Charging, Smart Charge, Instavolt, GridServe, Fastned, PodPoint, Chargy, GeniePoint, and Ionity, to name a few. Whenever possible, I like to try and bring a new charge point operator on every season or so. And this season is the turn of Raw Charging. Now, in this conversation, I'll be asking key questions about things like pricing and why Raw Charging can cut prices at some locations but not others, accessibility, canopies, why they might be thinking about creating their own app, and regular listeners will have heard Victoria Hutton and I talk about this on the recent mid-season roundtable episode, and a big favourite of mine, plug and charge.
The EV Musings podcast is sponsored by ZapMap, the go-to app for EV drivers, helping you find and pay for public charging with confidence.
Hi, Gary. My name's Neil Broadbank. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer and co-founder of Raw Charging. We're a CPO based in the UK and focus specifically on destination charging.
Good. We're going to talk a little bit about the destination charging, and because I've got some specific questions that a few listeners have sent in about that. And I also want to talk about some of your rapid charging as well. But can you just give us an idea in terms of the size of the network and kind of the split between destination and rapid/ultra rapid, please?
Yeah, sure. So we have currently 2,500 charging points in the ground today. As you can imagine, still growing at a great pace. More recently, whilst we started out and took a very deliberate position in the early days, building out AC charging infrastructure in destinations primarily built on long dwell time. Over time, we've seen different usage profiles where ultra-rapid charging works for a lot of destinations as well. So we currently have an ultra-rapid charging network that's grown to 500 sockets in quite a short period of time, and they're increasingly popping up alongside our AC chargers.
Are you able to share any statistics about utilization on your network over the last month, 3 months, whatever?
Yeah, utilization is a very interesting topic for us. Being owned by a very sophisticated institutional private equity infrastructure investor, where we're always kept very honest with performance of locations as soon as they're energized. And one of the things that comes through with destination charging in particular is seasonality for one case. Whether it be peak times throughout the year or the month or actually the week. So a shopping centre on a Monday morning has a very different profile to a shopping centre on a Saturday afternoon, as you might imagine, which with it comes different sort of pros and cons actually from how you operate that charging solution from a pricing perspective as well as performance. So we have a real range of utilizations across our network specific to the different types of destinations that we have our chargers at. From one end of the spectrum, we've got, the archetypal National Trust beach location in Cornwall, where I'm from, for example, where in the summer you see fantastic usage that is really strong, and that's largely due to perhaps holidaymakers traveling down in EVs from perhaps regions sort of south of London and so on. Consequently, we're also seeing different profiles with our growing ultra-rapid charging networks, such as in the centre of London, there's high utilisation all the time. So you might be seeing sort of 5, 6, 7 hours of constant usage from such as sort of ride-sharing, ride-hailing drive platforms such as Uber, other delivery van services using our chargers. So a real range of utilisations, Gary.
Can we tell us specifically about the locations? Because you mentioned the National Trust as a site that you work with. What is your actual process for looking at the portfolio and saying, well, this is where we're going to put some chargers versus, no, this is probably not a good site? What goes on in the planning process before you actually commit to putting money out onto a given location?
Absolutely. And I think the answer is grounded partly in our heritage as well. So early on, we took a very deliberate position around destination charging, where rather than building standalone EV charging hubs, we partnered with some of the UK's leading leisure, retail, hospitality destination brands to install chargers in the places where people are already spending time, which we've always been quite clear on. It gives us two clear pillars for the success of our network. First, you've just got built-in demand. So we're not just relying on passing traffic, which is opportunistic. People are already going to these locations for some other reason than to fuel their car. And then secondly, it gives us a unique brand association as well. Being a fast and dynamic organization that has a growing brand, we can't necessarily hope to have the prestigious level of sort of customer profile that the National Trust or the RHS might have from years of loyalty. So we really like to align with our host partners there, and you must treat that with respect. In answer to your question around the process for integrating charging into those locations, being a destination location-based charging provider, the first thing we've always done is align the charging strategy in terms of the primary use case of a site. And often there are secondary and tertiary use cases at destination where ultimately different charger types and speeds come into play. So AC chargers, I've heard you talk about it before, they're perfect for the hotel use case or anything over a 2-hour plus stay, really. So leisure sites such as Wisley at the RHS, which we've just launched over Easter and seen some fantastic utilization, are perfect because you might not know how long you're going to be at that location, but you will happily charge up your car where you can. Consequently, that same Wisley location could also be suitable for a medium DC rapid speed because you might be there for lunch an hour and a half, where actually that medium rapid option works perfectly well, or the gym, for example. And then, of course, you've got that DC ultra rapid approach where you layer in other elements of data such as traffic flow, certain conurbations, whether there are different arterial routes around you, which might incentivize a driver either through an app like ZapMap or a roaming facility whereby they see your ultra fast charger on their dashboard and they can get on and off the charger within 20 minutes and carry on their journey. So we've always taken a very holistic use case approach to the location and then layered on the use cases is the answer to the question.
So the first site I ever came across that was run by your site was the charge yard in Slough, which visited there a number of times. Those people who haven't been there, it's fairly centered in the middle of Slough. It seems to be attached to almost like an office block. There are a number of, I think, 350 kilowatt Alpatronics there, and 3 or 4 AC units.
That's right.
I wouldn't necessarily say it's close to the M4, although you can obviously get to it from the M4. It's not a destination because there's not necessarily any parking nearby or anything to do if you're not sort of visiting that particular office block. What was the rationale for putting that site in at that location?
That's a great question. And that can be described as our first hub. I think with one of the things being one of the earlier charging operators in the UK that has perhaps matured, perhaps only in the last few years into a much larger network. In the earlier days, we innovated with different locational types through our host partner who owned that location. So we both collaborated. It was Aberdeen, the investment firm Aberdeen. We collaborated with them to build out a flagship hub where that piece of land was effectively disused and nothing else could be done with it. So you're absolutely right, is that the archetypal raw charging destination? No. Having said that, it does serve a charging use case that we've started to grow. We've grown to know and love those types of locations. And I think that's also spurred, that's the story really around our evolving ultra rapid network growth, where we've had other landlord partners that we've decided to work on similar locations. So you're absolutely right. It's not a destination location compared to some of the beautiful places such as National Trust Stourhead, but it's very much part of the charging mix. And we like operating highly profitable locations like that because it helps the profitability of our entire network manage the earlier phases of EV adoption across the UK, as you can imagine.
Now, just before we started recording, you and I were talking about the fact that we have somebody we know in common, Charlie Gilbert from Field Dynamics. Now, Field Dynamics themselves are a company who provide a product and a data set that allows companies such as yourself to analyze given locations with traffic flows, nearby conveniences, and off-street parking, and any number of different parameters. How much of that sort of data analysis goes on when you're looking at a potential site? So you say you've got Aberdeen, for example, the company that you worked with there for the charge yard in Slough. Presumably they may have a couple of other locations that may be potentially suitable. Would you be using something like the data set from Field Dynamics to sort of compare and contrast one site versus another?
Yes, and it's another really interesting space that I'm personally passionate about, and it's something that's evolved over the time that I've been working in the industry, which is coming up to 9 years now. And I know Charlie very well, and we worked on quite an extensive project a few years ago. So I think the first thing to say is there is an increasing amount of data, and every organization, including ourselves, including our investors, love to get more of it. And we definitely caveat everything with something being interesting or something being useful. And we're quite disciplined in that approach, because you can, for example, you can put a point in a map for a potential charging location and learn 100 things about it, from number of cars passing, the population density, how many people in the local area do or don't have EVs or have off-street parking, on-street parking. All of these different elements will indicate to some or greater extent charging might be a good option in this location, and you might want to be able to indicate speed that you install. We've always taken a very holistic approach to increasingly apply data analysis with our site selection strategy and also our site charger configuration strategy. So I kind of go back to where I started a second ago in terms of we always ground our assumption of a site based on the primary, secondary, tertiary use cases where, okay, something is happening on this location today, come what may, with or without charging. Then we start to consider different data points such as traffic flow, such as population density, which are some of the biggest drivers today, certainly for ultra rapid charging. Destination AC charging, for example, it is perhaps more driven by distance traveled to site and the activity occurring at the site. So you do layer these pieces of data on top of each other and take everything into account. A platform that Field Dynamics have developed is a really impressive way of looking at that in a consolidated view in kind of one screen, which is sort of incredibly helpful when it comes to investor discussions, looking at a portfolio really quickly to make an assessment as to whether you can commit to investment over a period of time. Also trying to understand how the profile of a site might change over time, because obviously investing and selecting a site with one view today will change, as we're seeing from most operators who are expanding sites that are successful, or perhaps some locations have been installed ahead of EV uptake and utilization is lower. So data does really help kind of provide greater clarity on where you make these decisions in a very rapidly growing industry, full stop. We naturally are also very interested in how something like AI could accelerate this. But again, I'll take Charlie's words and coin it for him. Try never to be more than one step away from the fact of data in front of you, because you don't want to make too many assumptions on top of them, because there's that crystal ball thing to balance. So bottom line is that data is this incredible tool that enables us to make good decisions in the context of real world analysis and experience. I think, we're a tight team over here where experience and reviewing what we're seeing on our network today does feed back into our decisions.
So let me put myself in the position of a potential viewer or listener of the podcast. They may be aware of raw charging. They may have been out to a National Trust site. They may have seen some of the charges in there. But if I look at not necessarily your competitors, but other CPOs who work in a similar space, we look at, the grid servers of this world. They tend to be located, for the most part, in motorway service areas. If I look at Instabolt, they tend to be located around, say, McDonald's sites. Osprey Charging tend to be located around Marston's pubs, etc., because these are the kind of organizations that they've partnered with. Now, all of those also have other sites that are not located in the places that we talked about. Other than the National Trust, where would you say a typical EV driver would look to find a raw charging site, primarily a rapid charger rather than, say, a 22 kilowatt or a 7 kilowatt AC charger?
Yeah, no, and I think your summary is spot on, Gary. Where you would find a raw charger outside of our traditional AC destination archetype locations that we sort of touched on would be increasingly in the retail and hospitality space. So we do have a partnership with Green King where we're rolling out DC chargers alongside a kind of community AC network that works well. And then more increasingly, we have a number of retail park rapid charging, ultra rapid charging hubs with a lot of the institutional landlords, whereby we install a substation with over typically 8 ultra rapid charging bays. Increasingly, we have installed ultra rapid charging hubs upwards of 12. We're kind of, as an industry, I think we're stepping into this sort of super hub territory. So we're very early on in our journey in that, but we do have some strategic locations that we've focused on because we know there's an established footfall there today and a high traffic flow kind of in the adjacent area. So one of the main partnerships we're really proud of having launched recently is the Landsec retail portfolio. So we have partnered with them in quite a short period of time. We've formed a great partnership with Landsec, who are this fantastic, well-known real estate organization known across the UK, known globally, and we're investing sort of around 24.5 million pounds across their estate of retail locations. A lot of those are arterially linked. So Escape York, for example, is just off the M62 outside of Leeds. That is ultimately a leisure destination, but it's also just off of an arterial motorway whereby people can stop for 20 minutes. With our destination hat on, we've been able to lend a shoulder to the wheel of en route charging, which is a fantastic thing to be able to do. So that's just one type of location that you might see more raw charges at. Over 1,000, in fact, we'll be installing across that portfolio.
I released an episode last week about the strategic road network, and specifically I talked about the M1 because that's a favourite of mine. I live down near the bottom of it. My parents live up near the top of it. And as part of that, I received some data from ZapMap, and we looked at all the charging hubs, 6 or more ultra rapids that are either on the motorway or within a short distance from one of the junctions on the motorway. We charging, I believe, have 2 hubs along that route, neither of which are actually particularly close to the M1. Given that that is the most trafficked road in the UK outside the M25 with around 200,000 vehicles a day, is it an oversight that you're not actually located there? Is it on your plan to actually have chargers somewhere up along that route? Talk to me a little bit about the M1, please.
Yeah, so I think with our strategy, it's often been grounded by the landlord partnerships that we forge. So I go back to our original approach of being location-based through destinations that exist. There is a certain element of discipline that we approach ourselves rather than the point and shoot type site finding acquisition approach. Having said that, we are still actively looking at acquiring more sites, working with more landlords and installing hubs where drivers need them most. So as you say, it sounds like a very attractive region, and we've been aware of it for a while. Obviously, you can appreciate getting stars to align in terms of the right location with the right landlord, with the right grid connection to develop out the site. But no, it's certainly in our plans. And yeah, very, very important to highlight that other regions as well, such as the Southwest, being Cornish born and bred, I'm very passionate about how we can kind of increase the connectivity. I think, give them their credit, GridServe and of course Tesla have done a fantastic job at Exeter. I was just using it the other day. Again, we're lending a shoulder to the wheel down there. We've got a rapid charging hub in at National Trust Stourhead, just off the A303. So has kind of got this perfect destination and ultra rapid hub blend, so you can catch up on your Pride and Prejudice views whilst charging your car quick enough to get back on the road.
I think that between them, Tesla and GridServe have kind of cornered most of the grid capacity down in the Southwest there. Quite a lot of charges in a very small space there. Yeah. Can we move on a little bit to a topic which I know is very, very of great interest to a lot of listeners, which is pricing? and charging tariffs. Raw charging, I think that the pricing, I mean, obviously for the AC, it's a little bit lower. But if we look at DC and DC Rapid, we're talking, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, between about 76 to 79 pence a kilowatt hour site dependent, which is a reasonable drop below, what I would call the big four or big five, who are now heading up towards 89 pence a kilowatt hour for the most part. Talk to me a little bit about your pricing model and how you're able to actually price at that level.
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think pricing is by its nature is a dynamic beast and different to different organisations' P&L approach. But intentionally, we take a very simplistic approach to it. Ultimately, we're kept honest by being owned by a sophisticated infrastructure investor, where the long-term profitability is the fundamental core tenet of our network, alongside ensuring that our drivers are getting the most convenient, seamless charge, etc. So our pricing model is, as we say, very, very simple. Pay as you go, contactless. Hopefully, we'll be implementing a plug and charge solution in the future, because we know our hardware is sort of capable across Europe, because we use Alpitronic, as you've identified. Pricing is, as you say, mid-range intentionally, because it's that destination element for the ultra rapids, but there is that convenience. We do see increasing utilization in areas that are really busy, and you want to ensure over the long term that drivers can get a fair amount of charge whilst also cycling through other drivers who want to be there. So that's certainly something to manage over time in terms of time of use based incentives, to ensure that if a hub is full, the next queue of drivers can come in, which can happen in sort of congested areas such as London. But as I said, very simple approach to pricing. We do have a burgeoning loyalty scheme whereby drivers may be able to capture specific promotional based benefits from every time we launch a site. We actually do a week of free charging, because we like to create awareness within the local area of a charging site. And also having a customer that comes back time and time again is very valuable to us, because it enables us to decide whether we want to expand a site, or decide whether actually there are different times a day that people might be able to leverage this, such as critical fleet vehicles and so on.
Now, slightly controversial question. If I look, for example, at a company which I would probably say would be one of your competitors, which is the Manchester-based BEV, who've actually been on the show a couple of seasons back. They've recently taken over Mer, as you know. They've got some quite phenomenal pricing strategies with subscriptions and time of day tariffs that knock them down to, 39 pence a kilowatt hour. And given that you're cheaper than a lot of the big five, big six, as we've already said, but you're not down where BEV are. So is there room for movement? Do you think that they've got a strategy which is good for the driver but bad for them as an organization? Talk to me a little bit about your thoughts about the BEV strategy and how you may or may not be able to work towards that, or whether you would want to.
Sure. Well, firstly, it's a great strategy, and I really like BEV as a charging network. I think we see a lot of ourselves in them, in terms of, I guess, being part of a new generation of CPOs that are taking the UK market very seriously. Because I think it does create healthy competition and ensures that every operator out there has sort of the full integrity of their product, which is something I'm very aligned to very closely. It's a great model, and there is obviously a strong strategic partnership there with Octopus, which enables them to sort of leverage that ecosystem of energy and driver pricing. So for us, we would definitely be open to exploring those different commercial opportunities. I think it does come back to us being quite simple. We know that over a period of time, we have certain levels of profitability hurdles that ensure the long-term sustainability of our network is underpinned by our current pricing model and our medium to long-term pricing model, which is the one you've described. And at the same time, if you consider the destinations that we're increasingly installing in, such as within the Landsec portfolio, for example, there's Blue Water Shopping Centre, where this is a parking space number of 13,000, and 20 million visitors attend this site, and I think north of 8 million vehicles go to this site every year. So there is a defined customer base that go to that location come what may. And let's assume 4% of that number is EV today. I think we know in reality it's slightly distorted when you get down to the micro level, but let's assume a good proportion of that number is going to increasingly become EV. We may be able to leverage better pricing optionality for those customers who, say, go to Blue Water once a week, and that comes into our Raw Rewards loyalty scheme over time. So we definitely are proactive with that. We have a pricing strategy board where we assess the market as well, because pricing at one destination may be different for another. But again, yeah, very simple. I think the other thing is the magic word at the moment, so we try not to say it too much, but AI definitely does have a factor to play here, I think, in terms of how we could actually give more benefit to the customers in terms of if we get a dynamic energy tariff over a period of time, why could we not pass that on? Or equally, could we capture some more short-term profitability if a site has been underperforming in the earlier days and has now balanced out? So I think across a portfolio, you do take a measured view. And of course, we ultimately rely on customer loyalty. So making pricing unpalatable doesn't work.
Am I right in thinking, or did I read somewhere that you also have time of day tariffs? So if somebody charges overnight, they can get a reduction in the basic rate. Am I right about that, or have I misread that?
Yes, so that will be on some select locations within the portfolio. So I touched on, we have a partnership with Green King. So they have an estate of pubs and restaurants that sort of very familiar within the kind of local community sphere, I suppose. So we see opportunity for people who don't have off-street parking at home and therefore don't have the ability to install a home charger, but do or are increasingly driving electric cars, electric vans, and they can be incentivized to use our asset that may actually otherwise be slightly dormant overnight in some cases, and for an improvement on price, they could be incentivized to use it. So that's a very active strategy we take, and I think it's part and parcel of running a mature charging network.
Now, the devil's advocate would be saying, well, if you can do that for certain charges overnight, you can do that for all your charges all the time, but you're not doing that. So talk to me about why that's the case, please.
Yeah, no, I think there's potentially something in that, but actually I would say, again, it comes back to the heritage of our investors. You do require certainty to make day-to-day annual business decisions around how you fund the continued rollout of your network. So I think it happens in the round. I don't think we approach things in kind of a myopic way where you change the price today to make a buck for the next 2 days, if that makes sense. So I think we're very conscious about where we do make a change, and that kind of goes through the pricing strategy board, as I've touched upon. And we do think about, I think there are unintended consequences as well, of course, because if you do make a pricing change and perhaps competition opens up in the local area, once you lose a customer, you have to work quite hard to get them back. So I think a lot of it has to be grounded in logic and sort of causal approach.
The thing that I've heard a lot of charge point operators say is that if we can increase the utilization, we can drop the price. And if you go back and do the figures, then I've done them at a fairly high level. That's absolutely the case, because you've got a large fixed cost base that you have to pay regardless of how many charging sessions. So obviously, if you've got more charging sessions, you can apportion that out over more charging sessions, and the price per kilowatt hour drops. So there is a case to say that if you drop your price, you will encourage a higher utilization. So rather than saying, let's increase the utilization that will allow us to drop the price, there is a case to say, well, let's drop the price and see whether that will increase the utilization. And I think you've kind of talked about that a little bit, but is that something that your pricing strategy team have looked at and said, well, no, we can't guarantee the increase in utilization just because we drop the price. We're going to have to wait for the utilization to increase before we drop the price. Has that conversation taken place? Did that make sense?
No, it makes sense. I wouldn't say that specific conversations happened, partly because it's almost there are multiple conversations in one go in many ways. I think it comes back to that certainty. So arguably there is a leap of faith around price being the ultimate deciding factor. So again, going back to our destination heritage within our mindset and within our kind of thinking process. If you go to Blue Water Shopping Centre, we always use that as the best example. You aren't necessarily being driven by price because it's a premium retail location. So perhaps your decision as to whether you do or don't charge there would be based on how close the charging is to the shop that you want to go to, or how fast is the charging relative to the time that you're going to spend there. So we do take a case by case or archetype by archetype approach to our pricing across our network. So there are the more community local charging solutions. They are more driven perhaps by price, whereas in some locations, drivers are much more about the experience. And actually on experience, we're in the process with Landsec of essentially enhancing the driver experience through things like reservable bays. So, drivers are very much happy to pay for the ability to have that more premium charge experience. It's the first and last thing they do when they get to these locations. And to our host partners, whose business model are ultimately underpinned by people turning up and spending money, it's kind of really important to increase the loyalty on that basis. So I think what I'm saying is pricing is one part of a factor for why people will charge. And I think you'll be aware there's that McKinsey study. It's stacked in a bit of a Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I believe it's related to kind of ultra rapid charging, where the things that come into factor are pricing, reliability, availability, speed, amenities. So I think if you tick all of those boxes, the price probably then becomes a factor. So it really does depend.
Can we move on and talk about roaming operators? Who are you connected with at the moment from a roaming point of view?
So this is a nice and straightforward answer. We are connected with most thanks to our partnership with ChargePoint, the well-known Silicon Valley-based US charging network, who we've been partnered with from a very early age of the business, whereby we've been able to piggyback on all of the hard work they've done really over the last 20 years, building out sophisticated charging infrastructure and technology, working with all the other networks and EMSPs. So we're actively, and it's within my role, we're actively looking at how we can increase roaming presence, but we're very confident we're where we need to be in terms of vehicle dashboards and so on. And of course, alongside ZapMap, which is still my go-to tool, whatever the weather.
I like that. You've kind of conveniently brought us on to the whole topic of apps. Now, I had the mid-season roundtable a couple of weeks ago, and we talked about apps as a concept. And, if every charge point operator had their own app, you had all those apps on your phone, you would have somewhere in the region of 150 apps. Now, am I right in thinking there is not a specific raw charging app, but as you say, you use the ChargePoint app instead? Is that right?
You can use the ChargePoint app to use the raw network as it stands today. We do have app development ambitions in place, but you're absolutely right. We all have to download a lot of apps. So you need a really good reason to decide why you want to download that and use that repeatedly. But again, I think I've been a Tesla driver for 4 years, and the most seamless charging experience certainly is still the thing to be strived for. And contactless, of course, is an absolute must. And I think we've always been clear on that. Whether it be AC or DC, you need contactless functionality on your chargers.
Again, put my devil's advocate hat on. As a charge point operator, why are you developing an app? You're not an app development company. You've said yourself you're looking at bringing that in. There are hundreds and thousands of companies that will develop an app. ZapMap is one of them. Why look to develop your own app and have to build that competency in-house? Why not sort of go to someone like ZapMap and say, can you add this functionality to your app on our behalf so that we can sort of leverage that ourselves?
No, I'm happy to be asked that question, really. I think that's an interesting discussion for us to have with ZapMap, to see how two industry minds can get in the room to see whether there's some value that can be brought to us as a CPO that wants to do specific things with the drivers on their network and the drivers that go to their specific locations. So, no, I'm happy to take that one. We do see value in working with our host partners really closely. So Landsec, for example, we work very closely not only with their asset management team to roll out the charges, which is often very complex and legal and involves liaising with multiple parties and stakeholders to roll out these charges. We're also working with their consumer team, where they're very data driven. They know their customers inside and out, and they know what they do and don't like. And actually, we're at a stage where layering in charging infrastructure into that profile and persona is part of their customer journey, whether it be planned or unplanned. And an app, or at least a digital customer journey, may come part of the charging journey.
I say, go back and listen to the mid-season episode, and you'll know my attitude on apps on that. But before we move on, because I've obviously got the ChargePoint app on my phone, which incidentally I downloaded because when I first went to the charge yard in Slough, that was what it said, download the app. So I did. So it's been on there ever since. There is a 22 kilowatt charger about 2 miles from where I'm standing at the moment. I went into the ChargePoint app and I wanted to find out how much it was going to cost me to charge at that particular location. And for some reason, it couldn't display the price. It kept saying the price varies over time. Is that not against the Public Charge Point Regulations 2023, where you should be able to know what price you're going to be charged before you actually start the charge?
I suspect that's more of a software issue because, as far as we're aware, and in our close relationship with ChargePoint, we are up to the relevant levels of compliance across the UK.
Let's talk accessibility. PAS 1899, it's a standard recommendation, but it's not necessarily being enforced, particularly with Landsec, for example, and the expansion that you're putting in there. Are you going to be complying with PAS 1899 regulations?
Yes, I think the first thing to say is we're Charge Safe accredited, and we know Kate and the gang. And then we formed a working group and a working paper following that accreditation to kind of continually improve how we approach accessibility, because as you're right, with an increasing EV population, inevitably we'll have a more diverse EV park and driver set. So as sort of standard, every new site has accessible charging provisions. And actually we're also approaching it with other innovative approaches. So one way of looking at it is sort of the physical approach in terms of spacing. How do you position chargers? There's that element to it. The other side of it is how could perhaps a software-based solution enable that further. So I touched on reservable bays earlier, but we see that actually as an innovative way to give people who might have some accessibility issues peace of mind that they could secure a charger themselves with the usage of digital journey to reserve a charger. So it would be accessible for them at a particular time as well. So it's not just a physical thing. So we've taken a really holistic approach to that. It's in sort of a development stage, but you can understand what I'm getting at. The other side of accessibility, I think, is just kind of accessibility with a capital A. So we're due to a quite exciting launch, another retail portfolio where we've had to intentionally oversize most of the spaces to cater for larger commercial vehicles. So actually everyone benefits from that portfolio, as you can imagine. And then I think the other things, we're sort of getting into amenities, but launching cubicles and toilets on other hubs in destinations where the destination car parks themselves are actually quite big. So whether you are or are not going to that location, or whether you are or are not going to that destination for its primary purpose, and actually you are just topping up because you want to get back on the road, we're looking at launching cubicles and kind of toilet-based blocks for additional hub-based accessibility and comfort.
Always a big fan of amenities at charging stations. What I'm also a big fan of is canopies. Now, if we look at, and I don't like doing comparisons between CPOs, but if we look at someone like MFG, with very, very few exceptions, it doesn't matter where they put chargers, they'll always put a canopy over it. And yeah, we know FastEd do that as well. There are very, very few others that will do that at all locations. What's the raw charging attitude or approach to canopies at this?
This is the famous question, isn't it? And being a fan of EV musings, I know it is a topic that's of a great passion to you, Gary. So canopies, I like them, and you've already mentioned our raw Slough charge yard, where we have a canopy. So we've done them. We know what they're about. We know the design. We know the planning considerations. We are doing more as part of a new super hub line within the Rural portfolio, where they're larger, ultra rapid charging hubs where comfort and additional canopy standalone EV charging canopies are required. So kind of touching on the point I was saying a second ago, I think our fundamental approach is, again, grounded in our destinations, where once you've plugged in, you're going into the destination that you've gone to. So whether that be the coffee shop on the location, or whether that be one of the destinations, whether it be one of the garden centres, you're going inside. So that's always been our approach. And it may change and it may evolve. I think in the retail space in particular, the retail park space, it can be challenging to install canopies due to other retailers' branding rights, advertising rights with their big box retail advertising, hoarding and so so on. It's rarely just a simple shall we do it, shall we not discussion, as you can imagine, in locations that are obviously often quite prestigious or have flagship tenants higher up in the pecking order.
I am going to have to stand up and give a voice to somebody who I know will be listening, who is Ian Trott, who is a full-time wheelchair user. And he will, I think, quite rightly pull you up and say, yes, once you're charging, you're probably going to be in the location and it doesn't matter whether it's wet. But if you're in a wheelchair, you are going to be exposed to the elements for a lot longer than somebody who is able-bodied as you try and negotiate your way around the vehicle, potentially with a heavy cable on your lap and trying to get all that plugged in. So whereas you and I, who are both able-bodied, may be able to plug in and get it started on a contactless within 15 or 20 seconds, somebody who is in a full-time, who is a full-time wheelchair user may be out there for several minutes, and they will definitely appreciate a canopy. Having said that, I would like to point you to, and I'm sure you're aware of this, but just for the listeners, two other CPOs who I think are doing good work in this area. MotoCharge, they've now started putting chargers in at a couple of MSAs, and I've been to one, there's one Reading near me. They've got individual canopies over each charger as opposed to a big canopy with a number of chargers underneath. Probably worth having a look at that. And you were talking earlier on about charge booking. Arnold Clark have got that nailed. I tried that about 18 months ago. They've got the process in place. You know, rather than reinvent the wheel, you might want to go out and have a word with them, see what they're doing, and see whether you can use a couple of buzzwords, leverage the synergies there. I don't know.
No, I think the industry is there for people to partner to make the whole driving journey more straightforward, right?
Absolutely. Now, my three, other than canopies, you know, my three other favorite buzzwords: plug and charge. Now, you mentioned earlier that because you're on the Alpatronic units, they enable the plug and charge. Do you have a timeline for doing that? Are you working with companies like Hubject to get that put in?
So again, it comes back to our partnership with ChargePoint effectively. So as a Tesla driver of 4 years, I say I'm a massive advocate for the plug and charge, or at least with Tesla, you know, the concept of plug and charge. I think you rightly pointed out in your other podcast that auto charge is a feature for other networks, but actually it's not that true integrated end-to-end multi-network vision that everyone should be striving towards. So for Raw, P&C is a matter of when the implementation happens, and as a result of that, what collaboration needs to occur between effectively our relevant third-party providers. Because I think earlier you rightly touched on, you know, why be a developer, why be a stack developer, tech developer. We're focused on building out the charging network, and we know our technology is functional and capable of it. So it's a matter of when and timing. So no specific timing on it, but it's something that could come together quite quickly based on what we're seeing with Hubject across Europe. Based on, we know it's physically capable already. It's very possible that our first charging super hub at Blue Water Shopping Centre with Landsec, where we'll be having the Alpatronic HYC1000 system being installed, that has it from day one.
And ultimately, are you intending plug and charge to be on all capable units that you've got, i.e. the AC units as well? Or do you think it will only be confined to the Alpatronic Rapid, Ultra Rapids?
Well, again, as I say, as a massive fan of it, it would be lovely to think that we can get there with that. And, you know, we're confident with ChargePoint's Silicon Valley heritage and their software capability that that's something that is possible, because the AC charging has had that ability for some time, and it's how you marry that relationship with the OEMs and the vehicles themselves. So there's definitely an aspiration. Is it going to happen today? No, but yeah, as you can appreciate, we do have quite a sophisticated roadmap for how we keep improving our network, and as more and more drivers are starting to use it on a daily basis or on an ad hoc basis as they're bumping into our chargers, how do we make them keep coming back?
Now, when I knew you were coming on, I asked my network if there were any specific questions that they wanted me to ask you. And two came up, ironically, about the Brecon beacons. Now, the first was from Sarah Sloman from Paythrough. And she said, you've had success implementing AC long-stay destination charging in rural locations such as the Brecon Beacons National Park, obviously in partnership with the National Trust. Her question was, how did you stack up the projected utilization and decide to bid first on that? Or was it the fact that you were with National Trust, they were there, you were going to go there regardless?
Yeah, the second point there hits the nail on the head. Having said that, what a fantastic location. So often being that destination-based provider, you take the portfolio approach with your partners because they're often looking for a single integrated solution. The National Trust have evolved from being early movers in the EV space, but themselves confessing to having a bit of a patchwork quilt of, generation one legacy charging infrastructure. As part of their relationship with us, an agreement on day one was how do we modernize the entire estate as well as expanding across most of the portfolio. And the Brecon Beacons was the coming together of an amazing project where they were upgrading the car park itself due to increasing visitor numbers and how popular the location is, whatever the weather, pardon the pun. And AC charging is the perfect use case there because you are climbing up a hill for quite a period of time.
Sarah said she wanted me to thank you personally for putting the chargers in there because she does exactly that. Any weather, she'll go park up there and go for 2-3 hours hiking up in the. The second question I got was from six-time Guinness World Record holding efficiency driver Kevin Booker, who actually works in the Brecon Beacons National Park. And he said, how did you secure grid connectivity for that side? Because he's up the road trying to put chargers in at a different location and he's struggling to get connectivity. Now, I think he's talking about the Pontedar site that's between Brecon and Merthyr Tydfil, isn't he? So do you have any sort of insights for him about how you were able to get the connectivity for that site?
Yes, 2 words, collaboration and perseverance. So collaboration in the sense that we operate a charging solution there in partnership with the National Trust, right? So it's their location, or the National Trust are certainly custodians of their locations. We had to work with them, with the local distribution network operator, with our grid connection specialists, and lining up all of our processes together is one thing. But actually, as your contact rightly points out, there is a lot of constrained grid there. So we actually had to wait a number of years actually to get that site to fruition as part of a wider project where some major reinforcements were done in the local network. That they'd been scheduled for years ahead of our project. So there was a bit of, the third word would be luck there. Secondly, the perseverance is there are a number of different processes you need to go through and move them concurrently and make sure everyone's on the same page. So collaboration, perseverance, I would say, and particularly with the increasing levels of technology out there, grid is slightly overblown in our experience in terms of being a real barrier to a charging installation being installed. There's a couple of things at play there. We are often, installing National Trust properties, they are often in rural locations at the end of low voltage networks, but we've enabled to, one, install AC charging, which isn't very power hungry, so you can get a charging solution installed come what may. And there are increasingly affordable battery solutions out in the market that are able to buffer the grid, or actually also serve as their own dedicated connection off-grid entirely. And that's actually relevant to both a rural setting where there isn't grid, or in, say, the centre of an urban location where grid is maxed out, or you've got a charging hub that's so busy, which we have in East London, for example, a charging hub that is so busy, we are able to create additional grid connection that we didn't think was possible. So there's a spectrum there as to how challenging grid is, but collaboration is one of the most important words for unlocking the UK's grid.
I've got to say this, the sister podcast to this, the commercial EV Musings podcast, has just this week released an episode with Valor Power, who are one of the companies that you talked about there, who can provide a BESS, a battery electric storage system, with attached chargers, and they do favour Alpatronic as well. So check that out if you want more information. It's their Volt Station product, and they just ship it in on the back of a truck, plug it in, put a standard grid connection in there. It doesn't have to be high voltage or anything, and it will charge the battery and then straight out to the charger straight out. So hopefully anybody who is in your situation who wants to do that can have a word with Valor Power about that.
Worth a conversation.
Last season, we had Craig Marsden on the show. Now, Craig runs EVCI Global, who do accuracy checking for EV chargers. So do they dispense the amount of energy that you're paying for? Now, in the work that he's done across any number of charge point operators, he's found discrepancies as much as 30% over and under dispensing. And this, in certain cases, was from CPOs who were asked in advance, are your charges accurate? Well, yes, we're confident that they're accurate. He did the test, 30%. Were they over-reporting? So people were getting a lot more energy than they were actually paying for. Over-dispensing costs CPOs money. Under-dispensing leads users to be undercharged, and it creates mistrust between charge point operators and the EV community, not to mention any potential legal risk. So how confident are you that your charges dispense to within plus or minus 2% accuracy, which is the MID threshold for certification?
Yes, so it's a good question, and we met with the team there because it's a topic we're very interested in. So we're sort of going through that exploration process, but we're ultimately very confident being supported by Alpatronic, which I think now is actually the world's leading DC hardware in terms of sales. And they're a fantastic engineering-based business out of Italy, where engineering is at the core of their heritage. So they're proper product focused individuals, where ultimately the highest level of electrical engineering quality and therefore energy output and accuracy comes part and parcel of their product. So again, I think it comes down to us relying on tier one partners to be able to provide a reliable charging solution. So yeah, we're very confident and actively exploring how to say that with even more certainty.
Do you have, as we come to the end of our time together, do you have any final words you'd like to say to the watchers and listeners of the podcast?
So I think with each day, drivers are more likely to come across a raw charger at either one of their favorite destinations, or increasingly relying on their local retail location or their local hospitality location to rely on our fairly priced ultra rapid charging network to get them from A to B.
And Neil, thanks a lot for your time. It's been a great conversation. Very much appreciate it.
Thanks, Gary.
A couple of takeaways from this discussion. Firstly, raw charging are predominantly an AC destination charging operator who have over time crept into the rapid and ultra rapid charging space. They've linked up with partner organizations to install large hubs at several key locations. And Neil mentioned Blue Water in Essex specifically. Now, from a pricing point of view, they're not at the stratospheric level of some of the larger CPOs, and they're looking at the ability to use AI to help link energy pricing to charging tariffs, which I think is an interesting approach, and I don't think it's one I've heard mentioned before. Now, if you were watching the video rather than listening to the audio, you'll have seen a big smile come over my face when Neil mentioned that they're giving serious consideration to implementing plug and charge for their Alpatronic units. Now, as a big fan of plug and charge, it's interesting to note that if they do bring it on board soon, they'll be one of a very select few who've implemented this tech in the UK. And once customers see how easy it is to set up and use, I can see this being the tip of the iceberg for plug and charge in the UK as other charge point operators take it on board, so fingers crossed. So any thoughts on this? Do you use raw charging sites at all? What's your experience been like with them, if you have? Let me know. info@evmusings.com.
The EV Musings podcast is sponsored by ZapMap, the go-to app for EV drivers, helping you find and pay for public charging with confidence. ZapMap is free to download and use with subscription plans for enhanced features such as using ZapMap in car, on CarPlay or Android Auto, and discounted charging across thousands of charge points.
I hope you enjoyed listening to today's show. It was put together this week with the help of Neil Broadbank from Raw Charging. Many thanks for his time. If you have any thoughts, comments, criticisms, or other general messages to pass on to me, I can be reached at info@evmusings.com. And on the socials, I'm on Blue Sky at evmusings.bsky.social. I'm also on Instagram at evmusings, where I post short videos and podcast extracts regularly. So why not follow me there? Thanks to everyone who supports me through Patreon on a monthly basis and through coffee.com on an ad hoc one. If you enjoyed this episode, why not buy me a coffee? Go to coffee.com/evmusings and you can do just that. ko-fi.com/evmusings. Takes Apple Pay too. Now, regular listeners will know about my 2 ebooks. So you've gone electric, and so you've gone renewable. First one of those has had a recent update. You'll see with a bright red image on the front, just like I'm showing on the screen here. Both of those are 99p each or equivalent, and you can get them on the Amazon Kindle store. Check out the links in the show notes for more information, as well as a link to my regular EV Musings newsletter and associated articles. Now, I know you're probably driving or walking or jogging or in the shower or washing the car, but if you can remember and you enjoyed this episode, drop a review in iTunes, please. Really helps me out. I did go in and have a look recently at some of the most recent reviews. Thank you very much for those who took time to do that for me. If you've reached this part of the podcast and are still listening, thank you. Why not let me know you've got to this point by messaging me at musingsev.bsky.social with the words, not raw, but very well done, hashtag if you know, you know, nothing else. And thanks as always to my co-founder, Simon. You know, he's always looking for new places to take his electric unicycle. Somewhere different, modern, maybe even a little unusual. I asked him whether he'd ever wanted to be able to cycle across the dome of the O2 Arena, what was the old Millennium Dome. And he told me...
Yes, and it's another really interesting space that I'm personally passionate about.
Thanks for listening. Bye-bye now.